Esta es tu vida, sé protagonista.
Dirige tu futuro en el mejor lugar.
En la UBAC, detona tu potencial.
En la UBAC, sé libre para avanzar. Somos tu gente, hagámonos más fuertes.
Juntos lograremos triunfar.
Buenos días para todas y buenas tardes para nuestra audiencia en África. La Fundación Universitaria San Mateo y la Universidad Vasco de Quiroga una vez más les da la bienvenida a nuestro Summit Internacional Desafíos en los negocios globales, África, una oportunidad de mercado. Damos la bienvenida a nuestros invitados nacionales e internacionales quienes hoy nos acompañan. Mr. Sojin Umisiri, CEO de Nasuru, compañía que conecta a África con el mundo, quien nos acompaña hoy desde Estados Unidos. Bienvenida. Mr. Rose Rano, directora de la Oficina de Facilitación de Comercio del Gobierno de Kenia, África. Bienvenida a este panel. La doctora Carolina Cortés Vázquez, coordinadora del Programa de Comercio Internacional de la Universidad UBAC. El doctor Jerónimo Delgado, director del Grupo de Investigaciones de África de la Universidad Externada de Colombia. El doctor Sebastián Galindo Cantor, consultor internacional y docente de la Fundación Universitaria San Mateo. La doctora Ligia de la Universidad Vasco de Quiroga. Y el doctor Gustavo García, el coordinador del Programa de Negocios Internacionales de la Fundación Universitaria San Mateo. Quien les habla, Ciris López, directora del Programa de Negocios Internacionales y Especialización en Gerencia Logística. A todos nuestros invitados, a toda nuestra audiencia, agradecemos hoy haberse dado cita en este escenario para hablar de África, una oportunidad de mercado. Preámbulo, invitaría a la doctora Carolina, quien nos va a dirigir un gran saludo desde la Universidad Vasco de Quiroga. Tiene usted la palabra, doctora Carolina.
Muchas gracias a la doctora Ciris. Antes que nada, un enorme saludo, un agradecimiento también para todo este gran equipo de trabajo de la Uni San Mateo, de aquí de la UBAC, que la verdad hemos coordinado estos esfuerzos pensando en todo nuestro alumnado, como parte de la directriz que tenemos en la Universidad Vasco de Quiroga, que es el fortalecimiento de las relaciones internacionales y vivir este ambiente de clase internacional, es que se ha pensado en ejecutar y desarrollar este gran programa el día de hoy, esperando que para todos ustedes, para todos nuestros chicos, sea de un gran fortalecimiento. La verdad es que lo hemos hecho con mucho esfuerzo, con mucho amor y pensando en que esta sea una gran oportunidad para que conozcamos sobre nuevas culturas. Así que pues agradecer nuevamente a la Universidad San Mateo, a todo este gran equipo colaborativo de la Universidad Vasco de Quiroga también, en nombre de nuestras autoridades. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos.
Doctora Carolina, pues muchísimas gracias por esa bienvenida. Realmente desde la universidad, la Fundación Universitaria San Mateo y la Universidad Vasco de Quiroga hemos venido fortaleciendo todos estos escenarios de internacionalización, colaboración internacional. Y bueno, hoy damos citas a este Summit Internacional para hablar de África. Y en contexto escuchamos hablar de África. A lo mejor resulta un poco difícil escapar de dos ideas ya preconcebidas en nuestras mentes, ¿cierto? A lo largo de su historia, por un lado, pues tenemos esa preconcepción de pobreza, hambre, enfermedades. Pero África, les cuento, que resulta ser tan grande como Europa, Asia, China, Estados Unidos juntos. África ha tenido un auténtico despliegue en donde algunos países desde el 2000 y 2015 han registrado un crecimiento anual considerable. Estamos hablando de aproximadamente un 6.2% y lo que se supone un poco más del doble de lo que se registra en ese mismo periodo para América Latina. Para mencionar algunas de sus países que han venido evolucionando, podemos mencionar y traer a colación Costa de Marfil, Etiopía, Tanzania, Ruanda, la República Democrática del Congo. Y esta última, quisiera contarles que actualmente se valora como una de las economías donde se ha aumentado la creación de empresas. Y por supuesto, todo esto se traduce a unas consecuencias sociales. Sus índices de pobreza extrema han disminuido, la hambruna ha disminuido, pero no somos ajenos a que hay cierta población, una cantidad de población considerable que aún continúa en estas condiciones. Pero afortunadamente estas perspectivas económicas son muy favorables para el país, son muy favorables y la zona de este mundo, África, nos está haciendo un llamado a jugar un papel muy importante en la economía mundial. Son muchos los países africanos que avanzan de forma muy rápida y hoy nos damos citas para hablar y conocer un poco de ellos. A continuación, damos paso a nuestra primera sesión. Bienvenidos a todos.
Good morning to our special guests, speakers, attendees, and viewers that are following the event on YouTube. My name is Gustavo Eduardo Garcia, coordinator of the International Business Academic Program of the San Mateo University Foundation. I would like to welcome all of you to our International Summit of Challenges in Global Business, jointly organized by the San Mateo University Foundation and Vasco de Quiroga University. Before I officially open this summit, I am honored to introduce our special speakers. From the United States of America, Mr. Gino Miseri. Mr. Jin is the CEO of Unasaru LLC, a US-based company that connects the world of the app to Africa through market insights, trade events, consulting, training, and more. She is the founder of the acclaimed Trade with Africa Business Summit, where she convenes global business leaders, trade experts, policymakers, and innovators engaged in trade with Africa. Mr. Jin is the founder and creative director of Amuba, beauty brand and ethnic skincare and beauty line for Africa and African Americans. Gino Miseri is regarded as a global influencer and serves in Intra-African trade ambassador by appointment of the Africa Export-Import Bank and African Union, and governing body of the 55 African nations. Also, I would like to introduce from Kenya, Ms. Rose Rono. Ms. Rono is a trade expert with robust experience in trade policy, trade facilitation, aid for trade, trade agreement, trade negotiation, trade promotion, regional integration, gender mainstreaming for trade, private sector development, institutional development, white professional providing technical assistance for aid, trade and private sector development to business support organization, trade promotion agencies, national governments and regional economic communities, institutional capacity building and trade on trade-related issues, and national and regional exchange of goods and service. Likewise, we are joined by Sebastián Galindo Cantor, professor and consultant at the San Mateo University Foundation with extensive experience in the custom and foreign trade sector. He will be the panel moderator. Having said that, please, Sebastián, the microphone is yours.
Thanks, Gustavo, and welcome for all our participants. Good afternoon to Mrs. Rono in Kenya. Good morning for Mrs. Tojin in the United States. First of all, we would like to apologize. Mr. Geronimo is having some technical problem for their connection. Our team is working with them. Now, to enter into substance, if we talk about Africa, we might have a lot of questions. How much is the trade balance between Africa and Latin America? Which is the main potential of Africa to diversify their markets? How difficult could be finding and closing business with African companies? what are the new competitive advantage for the region under new African trade agreement and the impact in the international trade? Those are only a couple of questions that we could ask and that we're going to talk about today in our summit. But first, I would like to introduce some key aspects about trade in Latin America. No? If we talk about Latin America, we can only think in just a partial scope agreement between the Southern Common Market, Mercosur, and the Southern African Customs Union, entering force in 2016. The trade balance between Latin America and Africa is positive and represents only 3% of share between the two regions. Many countries in Latin America and Africa share the vision that opening trade policy is a key element in the economic growth of our countries. The Africa Continental Trade Agreement is one of the largest ones in the term of countries signed in the last 25 years of the World Trade Organization. Finally, to close, we can say that Mrs. Ngozi Okonjo is in the final round to be the next director general of the WTO. And the most important one, I think, is that Africa has been an example for the world, for the importance, for the multilateralism in time of crisis. So having said that, I would like to introduce Mrs. Tojin. And good morning, Mrs. Tojin, and welcome to this summit, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's such an honor, such a pleasure to be joining you. It's just amazing to be a part of this great event. And it delights me to also see the interest in growing Latin America, Africa trade engagement. From my perspective, we are just at the very beginning of something incredible. We are just at the beginning of what is the growth potential of trade with Africa. Some have been involved, but I see increased transaction. And when I talk about trade, I mean bilateral trade. Not just one direction, but both ways that is mutually beneficial to Latin American countries and the 55 countries on the continent. So what I want to do now is share a PowerPoint that just walks you through a few things on why Africa is important. I think the first step is why Africa, why now? And what are the opportunities and how can you engage? So that is what I would like to share now, that Africa is the future. 30, 40 years ago, we saw China also start this journey, and more opportunities have been created when it comes to trade with China in the last 30 years than in the last 200 years of China's existence. What we're seeing now, if we can compare, is that the next 20 to 30 years for Africa is going to experience rapid growth. And regions that key into those opportunities would benefit. So permit me to share my slides now. And the first message is Africa is the future. Why is Africa the future? Number one, there is a population growth that is currently exploding. While the rest of the world has a shrinking population, when you think about Europe and parts of US, population is going down. There's an aging population. In Africa, the population is projected to double by 2050. And that is just in 30 years. So 2050 is not too far away. So what does this mean for businesses? You already have businesses that anybody that has to supply baby products, this is your opportunity. More babies are going to be born on the continent. So when you think about babies, products, and anything to support a growing population, the continent of Africa is going to need all that to grow. Before COVID-19 struck and impacted all economies around the world, 6 of the top fastest growing economy sat on the continent of Africa. What that showed was that the rate of economic development was speeding up. That several reforms were being implemented by leadership of various countries on the continent. So people should watch out for the speed of economic development. It's going to grow really fast. When you think about growth and population, the youngest workforce is now going to be on the continent. When you think about the continent together, not just a country, but you think about the entire continent, it has 60 to 70% a young population that is, what we call digital natives. They're very digital focused. They're focused on digital first. So this young population, they're going to be globally conscious as well. So this population would drive increased global engagement with people around the world. While the older generation may not have seen integration of Africa in the global market, but you now have a young workforce that have a cell phone and is savvy on social media that regions around the world can now engage with and do business with. When you think about agriculture, within the agriculture value chain, 60% of the world's remaining arable land sits on the African continent. So when you think about equipment that is needed for agriculture, seeds that is needed, technical expertise, all of the things that Latin America is solving for or has solved for and has technical capabilities for, those are things that Africa over the next century would be importing: knowledge, capacity, equipment to support growing this value chain. There is a fast and growing middle class. And when you have a growing middle class, the purchasing power of the middle class also grows. What does that mean? It means there is now a larger middle class that can buy luxury products coming from the rest of the world. When you think about the growth of cell phones, before cell phones expanded on the continent, people thought Africans could not afford it, but now they're affording 2, 3, 4 mobile phones. Fast pace of urbanization. Right now, there's a shortage of affordable housing, and we've seen a growing interest around the continent for sustainable housing to support movement of people from rural areas into cities. So there's a shortage of housing right now, which creates an opportunity for those in the affordable housing space. There's also opportunities for power plants, power generating tools, because now people have to support, like, the grid to support massive movement of people from villages into the cities. So there is now infrastructure required to support a growing pace of urbanization. And finally, just to share, these are the things I just want to share. There's a whole lot more, but I serve as an ambassador for Intra-African trade. And what that really is, I know my colleague here would also share more, but what that really just means is that there's going to be more transactions happening on the continent, within the continent. So players that support that transaction would win. Africa now has the largest trade bloc in the world with the AfCFTA. So this is all good. Data, statistics, you can get this anywhere. But what we have done at Nazaru is to always also create a framework just to narrow down growth sectors, and growth opportunities. We call it the Trade with Africa framework. What are the pillars of growth that we've encountered over the last 3 to 4 years that we've been engaging with all the stakeholders, from government to investors, to trade experts, to policymakers, to diaspora, to people all over the world, as we've brought them together, as we've engaged? These are the common themes that we've seen, and we've put it together as this framework. Investors want to see an enabling environment. They want to see fiscal responsibility to protect whatever engagement trade transactions they're engaging with. We've heard that. We've also heard that there's opportunity in developing the agricultural value chain. When you think about farm to market opportunities, so with Latin America, whatever technical capabilities you have in this space is an export opportunity to support what I call the aspirations of Africans. So within the world of business, when you're trying to serve a customer, you need to understand what they need, because what they need is your opportunity to serve them value for value. And that's business, right? Commercial opportunities. You provide value, technical capabilities, equipment, seeds, technical understanding, even from a university standpoint. I'll give you an example. 2018, when we held the Trade with Africa Summit in Arkansas, the University of Arkansas told me we have one of the best agribusiness courses in the world. We train the best agribusiness people. Africa can send people to our university to come and learn. That was one opportunity right there, even in the education space. So agricultural value chain is what's one area that is going to grow. Africa has to feed the next 1 billion people that it's going to have in the next 30 years. We also know that there are areas and regions with food insecurity. So when you bring on another 1 billion people in the next 30 years, there's going to be pressure in the agriculture space. So rapidly now, governments around the continent is trying to seek support. They're trying to seek capacity from all over the world in order to be able to feed the next 1 billion people that the continent would add. Within the infrastructure space, manufacturing is growing. Africa has its raw resources. Africa has its natural resources. Africa has its people. Africa is now driving in terms of growing the manufacturing sectors. China is investing heavily in this space because there's now saturation and the labor cost in China has gone up and there's saturation. So manufacturing is gradually moving into the continent of Africa. Retail and distribution is also important. I happen to have a background working for the world's largest retailer, the headquarters of Walmart. So I know the power that retail brings in terms of creating a distribution channel for products that would emerge. And infrastructure development would have to come in to support all this area. And other areas that we call the foundation of this framework, we also talk about healthcare. So if you're in the healthcare space, you think about the needs of technology, equipment to support a growing population. That's an opportunity to export into the continent as well. Human capacity development, from training to project management delivery. Universities around the world now have the opportunity to train Africans to be prepared to support the next growth opportunity on the continent. Enabling technology is also massive, from blockchain. In fact, we've seen right now, blockchain is a reality in Africa. It is being used right now as we speak. And trade, like I said, is bilateral, import, export. For us at Nazaru, we are committed to Africa, and we also host the annual Trade with Africa Business Summit. This is a picture from one of our summit. And what we say is that people around the world needs to pay attention and then engage. And that's what we do at Nazaru. We teach people how to engage. We help people connect with key stakeholders. And again, to finish up and open it up for Q&A, if you have any questions now or later, I'm so privileged and glad again to have been invited to just share a little bit. And it warms my heart in terms of the interest. There's huge potential for Latin America and Africa to engage and to learn more. We'll be happy. I mean, I would love to stay connected and support in any way, but we are again at the very beginning of something that is incredibly amazing for the world. Thank you. My name is Toyin. It's been an honor to just share this little information. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Toyin, for your helpful insights about all the opportunities that we have to trade with Africa and increase this share market with both regions. Our next speaker is Mrs. Rose. She's going to talk with us about the new opportunities that for the business from the African Continental Trade Agreement. What is the challenges of the region and what would be the opportunities that we have for Latin America. Entonces, welcome, Mrs. Rose. Good afternoon to Kenya.
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to you. And I'm very happy to be here. You will allow me to just go through my slides and then I'll share my presentation later with you.
Okay, sure.
So basically, what I'm just going to take you through is an understanding of what this agreement is, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and what it portends not only for African countries, but also for those who want to trade with Africa. So with that understanding, I believe it's going to be very easy now for us to look at what opportunities that are there. So the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is basically an agreement that was crafted by African countries through the African Union. And basically, it came as a realization that African countries don't trade much with each other. And some of the statistics that were shown is that we trade 16% of trade. Trade amongst our African countries is around 16%. When you look at Europe, it's around 70%. And then when you look at Asia, it is around 50%. I don't know about Latin America, what trade, the amount of trade you have amongst yourselves, but I believe it must be much higher than what we have in Africa. And with this realization, the presidents of the African countries decided to have this agreement, which entered into force last year in May. And okay, it was ratified last year. It was entered into force last year in May. And with it entering into force, we have 54 African countries out of 55 who have agreed with the agreement. And since then, these countries have been doing negotiations on the different areas. That is the market access, the service for services, then the trading goods, and then that was in phase one. Agreeing on the rules of origin. That is currently ongoing negotiations. And then subsequently next year, we will have the phase two negotiations, which will feature intellectual property. It will feature competition, it will feature investment. So this is work in progress, and it is our belief that this is an agreement that is going to change. It's going to change how trade is in Africa. And traditionally, there's been so little trade in Africa, and this has been as a result of many factors, and not only trade amongst ourselves, but also trade with other countries. We also don't trade so much, with other countries outside Africa, and this has been because of non-tariff barriers, the bureaucracies, the many barriers that are there at the borders, in terms of customs requirement, in terms of sanitary and phytosanitary requirements, some of which are very cumbersome. Additionally, maybe just to let you know that the kind of trade that Africa has been doing, especially with the rest of the world, has been in terms of commodities. We export commodities as opposed to doing value addition. And I can just give an example of chocolates. You know, I think Ghana is one of the biggest producers of cocoa in the world. However, when you look at it, most of it, they import the cocoa raw as opposed to doing value addition, and then you can be able to even get much more. So you're looking at a situation whereby as Africa, we are sending out resources out there in terms of raw commodities as opposed to doing value addition. And this has been one of the biggest challenges in terms of trade within Africa. We're not getting much. We're giving so much out there, but we're not getting much. And these are some of the areas that I believe that opportunities are there, even for Latin America. Probably now, you know, come in, because we are now inviting people to come and set up, you know, manufacturing plants, you know, for some of these commodities. Like for Kenya, we have the best tea in the world. However, we export this tea as raw tea. You know, we don't do any value addition to it. So in terms of foreign direct investment, there's so much, especially with this agreement. And the agreement envisions removing 90% of tariffs. So if you're going to be producing according to the rules of origin, you know, you're producing from one African country and exporting to another African country, the tariffs are going to be reduced by 90% gradually. So you can already see these are very attractive incentives for any foreign direct investor who would want, you know, to set up shop in Africa. And as Toyin has mentioned, the cost of wage in China is now going up. What happened is that China for a long time has been the manufacturing industry or manufacturing destination for the world. However, with the rising wages, we are seeing that now we are looking at consideration of other areas, you know, other countries. And I think Latin America could be one of them. Africa could be one of them. So this is very attractive because now being the next frontier, then I think it's important that potential investors now look at setting up shop in Africa, whereby we have very attractive wages, you know, very attractive labor. You know, you're not going to pay as much. Also, in addition to that, the availability of raw materials, the availability of energy, you know, there's quite a bit of sources of electricity. I know right now maybe the cost of electricity is a bit high, but what has happened is that now at the African Union, there's a strategy that has now been put in place to ensure that there is heavy investment into the energy sector, which now will power these industries by ensuring that we are having low cost of labor. Additionally, we've been having a lack of unity between African countries. You know, we have aligned ourselves, you know, to the different regional economic blocks that are there: the East Africa Community, the ECOWAS, we have the SADC, and the other regional economic blocks, which we have focused so much in the past, and we have, you know, lost focus of the bigger picture of coming together. And the vision of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is to bring all these regional economic blocks together and for Africa to speak as one voice. So that was one of the challenges that was there, but with this agreement, then that removes that challenge. I think also political instability, we have been in the news very negatively most of the time, and I think some of you have heard of what is happening in Nigeria, whereby we are having, you know, massive protests. And this has been one of the reasons why it has been discouraging investors. But over time, we have seen a lot of stability. We have seen a lot of maturity in African countries. And when you're looking at the ease of doing business, you're seeing some of the countries like, you know, Rwanda, which were at one point were in a very bad situation, but they have reformed. You're looking at countries like Kenya, which at one point had, you know, instability, but now it's doing pretty well. So there's quite a bit of progress. There's quite a bit of you know, progress in terms of reducing the non-tariff barriers, in terms of making Africa more attractive, you know, business destination. And all this now together with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is just going to bring an effective, you know, an easy trading environment. So there are going to be quite a bit of opportunities that are there in this agreement that can be taken advantage of. the area of the energy, in the area of hospitality, in the area of manufacturing, which is really big, education. So there are quite a number of opportunities that are going to be there. So for me, what I would just think is that if you're a potential investor, now is the time to go. And we are hoping that by 1st of January 2021, the agreement will be ready to be rolled out. We had anticipated for it to start trading on it in July, but because of COVID, we were not able to do that. But there has been a commitment that has been given that from 1st of January, we are going to have, the agreement ready. And I know quite a number of negotiations are now being finalized, and to ensure that the agreement is ready. And finally, just to reiterate that I know that the publicity of this, or the gist of the Africa Continental Free Trade has been so much more on intra-Africa trade. But I believe we should not lose the focus to know that there is so much to gain from trading from other people, trading from other countries outside Africa. So I believe it's important that we are having such meetings to ensure that we are holding each other's hands as partners. And I believe this is the purpose of such forums that we have. So thank you for that, and I'll welcome questions.
I have one question. What is the best way to approach the buyers in terms of culture, Mrs. Toyin?
I think it's going to be less about culture, but more about language barriers. Because I think culturally, we all want the same thing. When I think about the culture, because I have a lot of friends that's as Hispanic, and I worked for Whirlpool Corporation before for 7 years, almost 7 years. And we had factory in Mexico, and I've visited Mexico before. So from a cultural standpoint, I actually feel like there are similarities in terms of family orientation, spicy food. We all love that. But I think the barrier would be language. Because when you think about the continent, you have areas that were colonized by the British, and then you have Portuguese, and then you have French speaking. And a lot of the trade that Africa engages in leans towards the colonial masters. So Britain, France, right? So that's been the route of trade. So the biggest question I would have is, how do we lower those language barriers? Because the only reason we could communicate on this forum is because you made it English. And I know with my friends, I've had to learn like Buenos dias, so I've seen people integrate culture and language. Like now, China is teaching Mandarin in Africa. China is taking Mandarin into universities and sponsoring and teaching people how to speak, because they know Africa is the future and they want to infuse. They're taking young Africans now through that, which is the same things Europeans did. So for example, as a Nigerian American, my first language is not English, but over the years, language was introduced into the education systems that English became the official language. And even I share with people in a funny way, myself and my husband were from the same country, but we don't speak the same native language. The only way we communicate and our kids communicate is English. So language has been used as a unifying force on the continent, whether through French speaking, English speaking, but we all have our second language. So the question I will have is, how is Latin America going to expose more Africans to Spanish? That's the question. Because if you can break that down culturally, because I have friends, we all love, and the culture is similar that we have. In fact, our food is similar. I make quesadilla, my kids love your meals and all of that. So that's just what I would say. Think more language barriers, not necessarily cultural, and try to solve for that.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Tojin. I have another question for you, and I would like to know if Nazaru, if your company have support any project in South America, in Latin American region, and how can we improve, like,
okay,
to improve
so
these kind of relations?
yes, I will share with you what is going on right now. Latin America, particularly Mexico, is being used by Africans as a gateway into America. For me at Nazaru, I like to give real data so that it's not just eye level. Let me give you an example. Hibiscus. You drink a lot of tea, hibiscus tea. Because of non-tariff barriers, so right now, US Africa has the Agua, African Growth and Opportunity Act. It has been on the books for 20 years, and it says Africans can import about 6,000 to 7,000 products from African countries in good, from sub-Saharan African countries in good standing, directly into the US market. But because of the non-tariff barriers, Africans have not been able to penetrate that market, but they've been working with Mexico to export into Mexico hibiscus tea, knowing that there's huge demand for the flavor of the tea. And I suspect those teas are being repackaged and brought into the US market. So what I would say is look at what value chain do you want to engage in? There's the importing and then there's the exporting. So right now, Mexico, at least that I know for a fact, is being used to as middle players between Africa and the rest of the world. That's something that you can keep playing that role, because there might be products that your region currently exports to the rest of the world, Chile, right? That you could be using the continent as a supplier, or you could be producing on the continent. Another example that I've seen that China is doing that you could think about is also China is producing on the continent and using trade benefits and trade opportunities to export to the rest of the world. So there are different dynamics, but what I would say at Nazaru is we try to understand each company, each client, what do they do today? What role are you playing today? Are you in the agriculture space? Do you have equipment? Because right now, one thing that China is also doing that you should look at is, while US may not be able to supply in terms of cost implication, they may not be able to supply Africa, like the Caterpillar, because they're so expensive. They are now looking at lease programs where they are leasing it to farms, they are leasing it to governments. But China is lowering the cost of those equipment and selling it outrightly. So there are different strategies you have to look at. You also have to look at which country needs what you are trying to export, right? So there's maturity level at different rates depending on what country. South Africa has a different maturity level. Kenya has a different maturity level and a different product basket. Ghana has a different product basket. So what I would say is, if you're supporting a Latin America business, you need to understand what sector do they play in today. It could even be, another example that we're supporting right now is the leather industry in northern Nigeria. They have a lot of leather, but they export raw leather to France. A lot of the luxury leather bags that you see, the raw leather comes from the continent. So what sector, that would be my question, is what sector do you want to penetrate? I hope that helped.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Tojin. So we have another question. Mrs. Lydia from Mexico is going to ask. Mrs. Lydia?
Hi, good morning. Thank you, everyone. My question is for Rose. Mrs. Rose, will you tell me which one are the commodities that you export most besides the cacao?
Mrs. Rose, you have your
I think,
mic.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, kindly repeat. I couldn't hear you clearly.
which kind of commodities? You say that you were exporting commodities and cacao was the first one. Which ones besides the cacao are the ones that you export most?
Okay, the cacao, that is for Ghana, but when it comes to Kenya, we have tea. We also have coffee. We have flowers, which we export to mostly to the European Union. We have meat and meat products, a few pharmaceuticals. So those are some of the top products that we export. But most of them, when you look at it, we are exporting them in the very raw form. So that what happens is that at the destination is where value is added, and you'll find that most of these products come back to Africa in a very expensive way. Like, for example, chocolate, you export cacao from Ghana, but when it comes back to Africa, the chocolate is very expensive. The same person who is harvesting the cacao cannot afford that chocolate. And additionally, also, you'll find that there's some of unfair labor practices are used, to produce some of these raw commodities. So I think there needs to be a shift in terms of the value chain of these raw commodities, whereby value addition is done in the continent as opposed to production just being done on the continent, and then value addition is being done at destinations.
Okay, now we're, I think that Mrs. Siris here in Bogota have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Sebastian. My question is for Toji. Which is the best from to begin business with your country?
So, can you help me understand the question? Like, what approach? How do you start? Was that the question? How do you start?
Yeah, how do you start a business? And how can we make the approach with African buyers? Yes,
I think the first thing is, when you understand the scope, you need to then narrow what. What do you want to do? Do you want to buy? Do you want to sell? Do you want to support? When I say support, they are actually consultants that support trade and investment. And I call them the trade facilitators. We actually we train people. Like a week and a half ago, I actually held the trade and investment facilitation masterclass. And I trained government officials from about 14 African countries in partnership with African Union. So what we are also finding is that when we talk about trade and investment, people don't know how it needs to happen. And what we tell people, what role do you want to play? Do you want to be an exporter? Do you want to be an importer? Or do you just want to bring those two people together and then facilitate that transaction? So for example, if you're a language translator in Latin America, you could have an exporter or an importer in your country that wants to buy or sell, but they don't speak English. You could provide your service and help facilitate, the trade, right? So it also becomes important to find your stakeholder. So number one, decide. Number two, where do you find the buyers and the seller? The reason we saw that, we created platforms where people are now engaging. So we have the Trade with Africa network, where people are now talking to each other and finding each other. It's also the reason we created conferences. So conferences are ways to find, with people flying from all over the world to connect and meet, because sometimes you still need to see, engage. And with COVID-19, we've been facilitating virtual B2B meetings. The other things you need to do is see it as a service to the world. And that's how you're going to grow relationship. You can start building the relationship now, and then over time, you can start doing business, because all over the world, we all do business with people we trust. So work on building trust. And then if I can say, finally, I also support one of the biggest events on the continent. It's called the Intra-African Trade Fair, and it's put together by the African Export-Import Bank and in partnership with the African Union. It's one event that is held, and everybody from all over the continent, the biggest players, the exporters, distributors, they all come together in one location. And in a few weeks, I'll be sharing more publicly about that. The next one is going to be held in Rwanda next year, September. So I also encourage people to show up, right? A lot of the trade opportunities when it comes to international trade or global trade, you have to be in the room where those conversations are happening. You have to know who you need to talk to. You have to be able to pitch yourself, your products. It's business at another level that requires network. So how really has to do with meetings like this to acquire knowledge, connecting with the stakeholders, deciding what role you want to play. I think that is the most important thing is, do you want to facilitate trade and investment, or do you want to be a buyer or a seller or a distributor? When you decide that, then we can help connect you to the right stakeholders.
Maybe
Okay.
I can comment on that also, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Yeah, please. More than welcome.
Just to add on what Toyin has said, most African countries now have embraced technology. And when you go to most of the websites, you'll be able to be directed to these trade facilitating organizations. Like Kenya, we have Kenya Can Invest. We have several institutions which do hand-holding for you. So if you are interested and you've done your research and you do want to trade with Kenya, you want to set up a plant in Kenya, maybe you've gone to the statistics and you've seen Kenya is importing quite a bit of the commodity that you're producing, and you probably want to set up a manufacturing plant in Kenya. So what you would do, you would probably just go online and be able to just engage with these government trade facilitating organizations, who will provide you with a step-by-step process on how you can be able to engage or do business with the country. And specifically for Kenya, we have something called the Kenya Trade Week, which we have it every year. And in addition to that, we attend most of the international exhibitions. You'll find a stand, you'll find an exhibition stand for Kenya. And in that exhibition stand, you'll be able to get people who will be able to explain to you how you can be able to trade with the country. And this applies to many other African countries. So what has happened is that now, as African countries, we've become proactive. We're going out there and we're seeking out for investors. So even I'd like to say, if there's anybody in this forum today and they're interested to trade with any of the East African countries, then you can be able to connect with me, and then I can be able to take you through the process. I work for the government, and I know a lot of trust issues are normally there when you're dealing with people who you don't know so well, especially if they're not government officials. So that's why it's important that you identify the right institution for them to do hand-holding for you, for them to be able to help you best to analyze that opportunity well, and show you the ropes. You probably need to register your business. You need to see who you can enter into a joint venture with before you can be able to move forward. Thank you.
Thanks for your insights. I know that Carolina from Mexico have one question.
Yes, thanks. Kenya is one of the countries reported with higher rates of growth in the last years. What do you think are the reasons for this?
Are you talking about during this pandemic, or you're talking about before?
Before?
Okay. Because it's actually true. We as other countries may have not done very well during this pandemic, we've recorded steady growth. In fact, it's envisioned that our economy is going to grow at the same rate or even slightly higher than last year. And I think for this, I can attribute it to our trade policy. our national trade policy, which has emphasized on manufacturing, which has emphasized on providing, affordable housing, healthcare, food and security, and also the encouragement of exports, encouraging exports. And also we import quite a bit. And this inputs into our, our local manufacturing sectors. And as Kenya, we also export quite a bit to the EAC region. So I can attribute that to the growth that Kenya has been having over time. We've also had reasonably good, political stability. And as you know, that with political stability, then you're able to attract foreign direct investors because people trust you as an investment destination. We also have a very young, youth, very young population who also contribute a bit to the economy. We have a good, sizable middle class, which also contributes, to that good growth that you have seen. In addition to that, if you've Googled about Kenya, we're also good in terms of technology. We are one of, the pioneers of mobile money, if you've heard about that, whereby you can just use your mobile phone to be able to, send money. So those are some of the few, areas that I can talk about that have contributed to the relatively, stable economic growth that our country has had.
My God. Thanks for your insights, Mr. Ronald. Well, I have an interesting question. I think that we know that the U.S. is starting negotiations with Kenya for a possible FTA. Yeah. Do you think that in the next future, we can talk about a free trade agreement with other Latin American countries? Do you know? What do you think about that? I would like to listen, Mrs. Tolgin or Mrs. Ronald. What do you think? If it works or it's possible?
Yeah. Yes. So for us, we look at the continent, and depending on what people need, we point them in the right direction. So I'm going to connect the previous question. I'll connect it with your question. When you look at the entire continent and you see South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, and you look at the landscape, Kenya does pop up to the last question. But one of the other things that they've done is primarily driven because they do not have the natural resources that countries like Nigeria has. So Kenya, in the last 10 years, they've done everything that the rest of the region needed to have done. So from a productivity standpoint, when you think about the population of Kenya, map it to the productivity of their exports, they're actually doing better than the rest of Africa, where other countries in Africa have leaned primarily on oil, on gold, on all of the natural resources. Kenya has leaned primarily on its human capital. That's the story of Kenya. They've developed their human capital. So she talked about technology with M-Pesa, with the policies they've put in place has actually helped grow the economy primarily because of human capital. So when you look at US, to the question you just asked, it's the same lens that US would look at the continent and look across and say, hey, Kenya is very steady for us to do a bilateral trade in. Because before you can do bilateral trade, you have to commonize. There has to be commonality in terms of your policies, right? Because if you want to do bilateral trade, both sides, there has to be commonalities in policies. So that's one thing I would say Latin America should start with. Looking at your own policies, which region on the African continent aligns with your belief that you want to establish bilateral trade with? Because when there's no commonality, you can't do bilateral trade because basically it's not going to work. A lot of the regions in Africa that have engagements with Europe, Europeans have tried to, when you think about the doing business metrics of World Bank, they've looked at those policies. If you remember the framework I put out there when I was sharing my slide, the roof of the house is policy. right? Fiscal responsibility and policy. So in order to start the conversation around bilateral trade, I would say, because it's government to government. And when you build government to government relationships, the next thing is then your business can do trade based on what has been established by the government. So policy is something I would say that you should look at in terms of what region, which policy aligns with your region in terms of belief, and where can you start that conversation. So US has done that evaluation of the entire continent, and they found Kenya to be more aligned with directionally what they want to do.
Maybe
Yeah.
Ms. Bruno have any.
Yeah, and if I can, lastly, you may do your research and find out that maybe South Africa might be a place to start. So it doesn't have to be one country or the other, but it has to do with that assessment, because I've seen South Africa, play more globally than some other parts on the continent. Go on.
Okay. You have an insight, Mrs. Ronald?
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. I think for me, I think I'll just go in. I think Toyin is very right. You need to identify what interests do you have, and what countries can be able to serve those interests, so that you can be able to approach those countries. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is looking at it from the point of view of the regional economic communities that you belong to. So that what will eventually happen is that we can have a bilateral agreement between the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the economic community that you belong to. So that makes it even easier in a way that you can be able to have access to opportunities, have access to many other countries, as opposed to just going one-on-one with selected countries. But as of now, maybe because the agreement has not yet kicked off, the African one, I think maybe the approach would still be the bilateral with the countries that you may be interested in, you find you have commonalities with. On the question that you asked about Kenya and going into a free trade agreement with the US, yes, the negotiations are on, and this was mostly motivated by Agua. Which is coming to an end, I think, in 2025. And Agua has been a program that has really, grown a lot of African countries, and Kenya has taken advantage of it quite a bit. We export some commodities to the US courtesy of it. However, with this coming to an end, then we are going to see that if we do not have an agreement in place with the US, then it's going to affect the traders or the investors who have been exporting into the US market. So for us, it was important that we start this. I know there have been some discussions that these negotiations could derail the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Contrary to that, I believe the negotiations that are there in place between Kenya and the US are very cognizant of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and any benefits that Kenya will get from the US will most likely be extended to other African countries. So that is the main motivation behind it, and it is our hope that we will probably have an agreement before the end of the year or in the beginning of the next year.
Right. That's true. One last thing on the same topic. So one thing I could also encourage Latin America is to tender and present their interests, to be at the table. So for example, we work directly with the African Union. The Commissioner for Trade and Industry for the 55 countries came to Chicago, and we have direct access to him. And so you have the approach of going country by country, or your region could, initiate an interest. You could just send in a letter of interest, acknowledging and saying, we acknowledge that the continent of Africa is moving forward. It could even be a congratulatory message that says, we congratulate, African Union in establishing the AfCFTA. We would love to explore opportunities, XYZ. Those are things that you can do today. And just a few days ago, we've seen Google and Amazon tender their interest in Africa. So you don't have to have all the answers because it's a journey. You don't have to know everything now, but I think it's important to send a signal to the leaders on the continent that, hey, we recognize that Africa is going to play a leading role in the future of the world, and we don't want to miss out. You can count on us. We can count on our support. You can even message and say, hey, any technical support that Latin America has, we would love to support you on your journey. And that is something that can be crafted and tabled to the right people. So at least you can start that conversation. So for us at Nazaru, we're non-governmental. So we are not biased in terms of our affiliations with any country. We lean more on supporting our clients. So we focus more on the interest of our clients and we guide them. We will not lead them astray, even though we could say we have affiliations. Our thing is we want our clients to win and we want to understand what our clients need, and we are able to point them to the right people, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Kenya, whether it's Ghana. We leverage our connections. So for example, in August, we hosted the advisor to the vice president of Ghana, and he told us what Ghana is doing. So for individuals like that, we could table recommendations to them. We could show them what Latin America wants to do, and we can start that conversation. So that's what we do at Nazaru, is being non-governmental frees us to be able to look broadly across the continent to support our clients.
Maybe I can add on to that if you don't mind, Sebastian.
Yeah, don't worry.
Is it okay? Okay, I just want to mention that the US has been very successful with in terms of penetration of investment in African countries and many other countries. And this is what they do. They will approach countries with partnership in terms of aid, maybe aid for trade. But in return, in terms of the negotiations, you'll find that the requirement is that you use an American, you will use IBM, you will use Google, you use an American company, for some of the contracts, that are going to be beneficiaries of agreements that have been done. So I think those are some of the opportunities that could be explored, whereby you approach the Africa Continental Free Trade Area or approach an individual country from the point of view of what can you bring to the table? How can you aid this country? And once you're aiding this country, because a lot of African countries are have a quite of number of these developing countries and developing countries. So some of them, for you to be able to capitalize on those investments, you must also extend a hand of assistance to them, to grow that particular sector that you might be interested in. And you can be able to lock the benefits that you envision your country to get in those agreements to ensure that you're locking in investments specifically for your country in certain areas that you want to grow. I hope I was clear on that.
We have other question. This is from a professor here from University San Mateo. This say, how is Africa preparing for the technological revolution that revolutionized supply chain and international trade?
Wow, I think so. As one of the topics that I actually shared with governments, one of it, the topic was digital disruption. In terms of how were they preparing? So for example, just like Ms. Rose shared, if you were to map maturity, when you think about technology adoption, technology maturity on the continent, Kenya and South Africa would rank high in terms of preparedness. So one of the things we are now educating the various governments on, especially now with COVID-19, we listed out about 12 areas that they needed to lean in on. One of it was definitely skills, technology skills. When it mapped that with the youth growth, The youth are those people we call digital natives, meaning the next population, all they've known is Google, Facebook, Instagram, right? They don't know any other world outside of technology. So we're telling them you need to prepare better. The world is going to rapidly change. It's changing right in front of our eyes. Don't think that the world is going to go back to what it used to be. It's never going back. One of the things I also shared with them, because we are very direct, is trade negotiations now has to go digital. So I worked for Walmart, and part of my previous role was to help build the global platform that Walmart uses for global sourcing, for buying around the world. And that platform had live auction, meaning trade was already digital. China, today to buy from China, you don't need to travel to China. You can access information digitally and engage and buy and transact and send money digitally. So digital disruption have been happening. In fact, the technologies that I helped build 5 years ago is helping businesses win today. So some regions like Kenya and South Africa were better prepared than the rest of the continent, but we are now supporting and advising them to speed up their adoption of technology. The youth have adopted technology through social media, but there's another layer of technology skills in terms of trade negotiations, trade engagement, because typically the cultural thing in Africa is they want to see you in their office. They want you to sit down in their office. Deals are done in person, but we are telling them now they need to be more open to digital engagement. And there were about 12 things that I went through with the government officials, but they have to invest in this space. It's new for some people, but Kenya got it right. When you think about payments, last week I also interviewed one of the leading entrepreneur on the continent. A few years ago, when we find out that Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook invested $24 million in a Nigerian startup, and this was a co-founder. And basically, it's a company that actually delivers technology skills to Africans, and they now support global companies with their technology skills. So we are not all there yet, but I see progress, and digital disruption is here to stay.
If I can comment on that, Sebastian, if it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Maybe I can just talk about the Kenyan case and how we have prepared ourselves. And I think this applies to many other African countries for technology. We just overhauled our education system, and we had an education system that has been there for quite a while, more than 30 years now. And now there has been an overhaul of the curriculum to focus on technology and to focus on the world of the future. So those are some of the changes that are being made to ensure that the children that we're educating today, we are educating them, for the world that they will be living in the future. Additionally to that, we are also doing, in terms of trade facilitation, we are no longer operating manually. We have single window systems which process, documentation for exports and imports. So we've moved from just being manual. Even our borders are now not as manual as they were in terms of processing people, processing, baggage. We have now moved to embracing technology, for this. Also, e-commerce platforms. There are quite a number of e-commerce platforms on the continent. I don't know if you've heard of Jumia, and they're developing, more and more are developing, whereby now we are having, markets moving from the traditional marketplace to online markets. And the COVID-19 pandemic has intensified this even much more, whereby now it is acceptable to do online business. A lot of people are now, buying even their own, basic vegetables, they're buying them online, as opposed to the physical marketplace that has been traditionally African. In addition to that, maybe an interesting fact. I don't know if you knew that there are more there are more smartphones in Africa, in Kenya than toilets. So you can see already that there's that embracing. There's been the embracing of technology. If you're seeing that person who may not have access to a toilet, latrine, or a washroom has a smartphone, then you can see technology has even surpassed some of the basic needs in Africa. So there's quite a bit of progress. So I think those are my comments on that.
Okay. Thanks for your comment, Mrs. Tojin and Mrs. Rono. So I would like to pass the micro to Gustavo in order he's going to introduce another guest that we have. And we're going to make like a little mix of tourism and trade. I think that is an interesting issue to talk about. Gustavo, the micro is yours.
Thank you, Sebastian. Before I introduce our next guest, I would like to say some aspects that took my attention of our speakers. The first one is that both of the speakers said that population is very important for the economy, and it is true. The main resource of the economy is the people, and the people and the population have to grow the economy. And the other aspect is that both regions, Africa and South America or Latin America, have been through a lot in terms of corruption, violence, history, but also in terms of personality of the people. And it is very important in the relationship of both regions. So this took my attention for both speakers. And now, thank you for staying with us. Now we're starting our second part of the summit, which we will talk about sustainable tourism. And in this sense, from the different themes of international business and given the current condition of climate change, it is important to deepen sustainable tourism and a development opportunity that involve the actors of the environment, the perspective of sustainability and the care of the environment. For this, from a very special approach, the expert of these issues will speak to us from the perspective of the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm highly honored to introduce our next speaker. So let's welcome to Ms. Irene Renewels. Please, Ms. Irene, the microphone is yours.
Hello. My name is Irene. My name is Irene Naroga. And I'm the managing director of Renewals Tours and Travel, which is IATA accredited in Entebbe, and also the managing director of Women Tour Uganda. We do safaris for women in Uganda. And I'm really excited to be part of this group and this meeting. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for the participation, Irene.
Yes. So, do I take it over?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks a lot for the invitation concerning tourism in Africa. And we've been in tourism for the last 10 years. And I must say it is a very, very dynamic business. It has a lot of opportunities and of course, a lot of challenges, putting the fact that we have huge changes that are going on in 2020. More so the pandemic, which really hit the business very, very much. But at least I'm glad things are beginning to stabilize in the world and we are picking up the pieces slowly by slowly. About the challenges, we'll begin with a few. And also I must say for example, in Uganda, the environment is really, we are picking up on taking care of the environment in our country. Because of recent, we got different investors in the country who now invest in production of doing houses in plastic bottles. Mainly, we've got different projects in, for example, I'll talk about Uganda because it's where I live. different people come in and do different projects that help in protecting the environment. So I must say, in terms of challenges, the first challenge is the pandemic, which has hit a lot of businesses in Africa, because you find that our governments rely on tourism as one of the biggest contribution to our GDP. So really that has affected the countries, most of the countries a lot. But the good news about that is the countries are opening up borders again. In Africa, most of the countries have opened their borders again. So people can travel in, of course, with a few restrictions, like most of the countries have taken away the quarantine for 14 days and all that. So apparently guests can come from all over the world and visit countries in Africa and enjoy their safaris. Because in this process, not only the tour operators lost, but also the visitors in Africa, they lost a lot. So I must appreciate our governments for really opening up the borders, and also for taking into consideration the rules that protect the general public. So that is really something to be grateful for. Yes, during the pandemic, most of the tour operators lost their assets due to a lot of cancellations because of the close of borders. So you find that some people couldn't get the refunds back from where they had deposited them, and they had to sell most of the things they owned to do what? To pay the clients. But some good news about that, I think for example, in Uganda, we had like 70% of our clients didn't cancel. They just postponed their trips. So that really helps a lot. And of course, much as there were no guests in the national parks, no guests in different places, at least the governments kept on taking care of the staff who were taking care of the animals in the national parks and all that. So apparently, yes, the environment was still protected even when the lockdown was going on. Okay, yeah, because I was taking you through the challenges and the good things about tourism in Africa. Yes, another challenge is about the instability in Africa. As you can be watching the news all over the world, we have a few countries that are experiencing instability, but it doesn't mean that instability is in the whole of Africa. Just for clarification, it is in a few countries in Africa. And you find that like 70% of the countries in Africa are stable. So please don't fear to visit Africa because of the news. We live here, we don't see any wars, and we live happy in these countries. And done with the challenges. Back to the opportunities. I'm sure on this in this meeting, there are a lot of people who would like to invest in Africa, who have seen a lot of opportunities and potential in Africa. Personally, I'm an entrepreneur in Africa, and believe me or not, Africa has a lot of opportunities. We do have a lot of opportunities whereby different travel tour operators from abroad all over the world can partner with the locally based tour operators, and then we work together, receive your guests from the airports and do the safaris on your behalf. And you remember that a client will trust more the agent who's in their country than a foreign African guest agent who walks into their office and tell them, hey, I do safaris. So with experience, I noticed clients abroad, they trust their agents that are locally based in their countries. So I appeal to all tour operators all over the world, please don't be scared to partner with different tour operators in Africa. We have a lot of legit, committed and faithful tour operators who receive your guests and work on them as though you're in the country. So that is really very, very important. It's an opportunity to explore. You don't need to sell your country only. We too in Africa, we sell your countries abroad. We send our Ugandan guests to different countries and they visit them. So I think the world is yearning to visit Africa And please don't be scared to partner with African tour operators. Another opportunity, we have accommodation opportunities. Africa, we have limited accommodation. That is, if we explore our opportunities of visitors who are really yearning to visit Africa. So you'll find that really if you invest in accommodation in our countries, if you go just a little, you'll see that our accommodations are higher. That means you get a high return on investment compared to investing it maybe somewhere else. I really insist, Africa has huge opportunities in accommodation. Please don't miss that chance. Yes,
Okay.
someone will ask you. Okay.
Thanks, Rene. Thanks for your words, but we have one question.
Okay.
Mrs. Tonyam. Okay, we have been talking about goods, trade of goods. Now we're talking about services. How we can improve, and services is like an issue, an important issue today on trade. How can it implement and how can ensure the tourism and as service? No, we have that the service sector is dramatically. It's a sector that is suffering a lot during this COVID crisis. So I would like to hear Mrs. Tonyam and after Mrs. Rene to contact like from goods to services. So please, Mrs. Tonyam.
Okay. So let me connect what my sister, Mrs. Irene from Uganda, let me connect it to this question because we have to connect the dots.
Yes.
The space she's leading is heavy on services, right? So Uganda, again, there are regions in Africa that do not have the maturity of what Uganda has. So tourism is something that Uganda has had to grow in order to earn foreign exchange. So they are more mature in that space. So what it means in the services space is exceptional service, parks, nature, right? That's something Uganda has. Now, let me connect at a higher level. One of the opportunities that Latin America has is, have you explored soccer, football, as an exchange program? Latin America, Africa League. Because soccer is something that unites us, but Africans today, they connect primarily to the European League or World Cup. Okay, so when you think about, for example, Rwanda actually sponsored, was it Arsenal on the t-shirt? They had tourism visit Rwanda. Tourism is the top revenue generator for Rwanda. So one opportunity with what my sister Irene is talking about, Uganda has a solid tourism opportunity, but look at it both ways. Africa visiting Latin America and Latin America visiting Africa. But what you can use to fast track that engagement, you can build on a unifier, which is football. If you can develop football, that is going to be, it's going to increase tourism exchange. You play a match in any region, and you can also think about what's NBA from a basketball standpoint, they've now built an African league. They're now investing in stadiums and developing talents. Soccer, football is something Latin America and Africans love. We love your players, we love your skills, we love your dribbles, there's mutual, and that umbrella will drive tourism. So there are times when you need to go country to country, but I'm telling you, if I were talking to Latin America right now, you can penetrate Africa based on soccer alone, because you will travel for your leagues. You can play some matches on the continent, You can play some matches in Latin America country, and Africa will fall in love with this. We love Maradona. We love Messi. We love...
This is the one.
Yeah. Why not? We love
Yes.
your food. You love our food.
Yeah,
Love
yeah.
spices. Let's do this. So my sister Irene, she has an opportunity right there in Uganda. But one of the challenges we have as Africans, we don't tell our story at the global stage in the right way to attract those visitors. But those opportunities exist.
Yes. Oh. I'm still thinking about it. Someone else.
Okay, Mrs. Rodo, do you have any?
Do you want me to comment on that?
Yeah, please, Mrs. Rainey.
Yeah, I must say, before the pandemic, we had started that opportunity whereby we used to go to different countries, of course, and exchange games. Like we used to have, for example, last year we had Israel in Uganda playing against the Uganda Cranes. And I think via football, that would be something that would work so well. That is, if we link it together with the people in football in our country. But I must say thanks a lot for enlightening me on that. And I look forward to learn a lot about it. But I wouldn't want to speak much about the football part because I'm not so informed about it.
Okay, well, we have another question here, and I would like to Mrs. Rono, your opinions about that, yeah? And it's, okay, we're talking about goods, we're talking about services, yeah, as a tourism. And from your point of view, yeah, what recommendation will Africa make to the world for the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals? Talking about trade and services.
Pardon? I beg your pardon?
Excuse me, are you listening to me, Mrs. Rose? Yeah?
Yeah.
Mrs. Rose, your microphone is off.
Yes, I'm here, but I couldn't hear you clearly.
Excuse me?
Kindly repeat your question. I couldn't hear you. Please repeat
Yeah. Like from the point of view, like of trade, yeah, trade. When we talk about trade, we talk about services, we talk about goods, yeah. And an important thing that we have a question here: it's what recommendation would Africa make to the world for the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals? From this point of view, from trade and service trade.
Okay, maybe I can tourism in terms of the SDGs, I think the debate on climate change has been raging for quite a while, and climate change actually has affected tourism because some of the endangered species, there's some species that have been completely wiped out of the continent, and Africa is known by for having quite a bit of wildlife, national parks, that have been, our areas of opportunity for tourism as a sector. So, and we can't ignore the fact that climate change cannot be, addressed in isolation. What happens in China, whatever happens in Mexico in terms of the degradation of the environment will definitely affect even Africa. So, for me, in terms of the SDGs, I think it's important we look at
excuse me, Mrs.
Climate. Yes.
Excuse me, Mrs. Rono.
Can you hear me?
Yes. We have some. Yeah.
You can't hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Now, yes.
Yes. Now, yes.
Okay. I think my contribution was on the issue of climate change. And, we rely a lot on tourism in Kenya, but with the environmental degradation all over the world, endangered species, becoming extinct. We are seeing a lot of environmental degradation, which is not only affecting tourism, but also affecting agriculture. And I think now in terms of the SDGs, it's no longer a responsibility of an individual country for climate change. It's a responsibility for every country.
Okay, Mrs. Reina, I would like to know how how if the tourism is already opened in Africa, and how it's the security measures that you are taking to in this crisis, how it's working right now in Uganda. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Last October, our country opened the borders, so at least few people are beginning to enter and leave the country. But of course, before you enter the country, you have to come with a COVID test 72 hours before, which is, I think, a common request for many of the countries in Africa. And of course, when you enter, they check your temperature. And if you have temperature beyond a certain, let's say, a number, you're isolated. And then you do another COVID test in the country. Then this mainly, different people are coming to Uganda for different reasons. But of course, there were so many people who were locked down in Uganda and wanted to leave the country. And also other Ugandans who live abroad, but were locked in Uganda. So apparently for this first month, those are the people that we're seeing that are leaving the country and coming in. But slowly by slowly, people are beginning to inquire and come back into tourism again. And when you go like in the national parks, for example, with the gorillas, of course, you've got to have your COVID test, but also the guests are limited. You don't mix with the community. You don't work freely with the community. So it's a responsibility of all tour operators. When you receive your guests, please keep them as per the itinerary. And when the itinerary ends, they leave. But apparently we are experiencing mainly, we're working on the guests who had booked earlier and we're supposed to come into Uganda, and we're stopped outside. So slowly by slowly, we are rescheduling their safaris to come and visit the country again. But of course, apparently everything is open apart from the bars. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Rena. Well, we have another question, and I think that it's a good one. Okay, we know that in the WTO, yeah, we're running the final, we're in the final steps to choose the new DJ, yeah. And we have the opportunity that Mrs. Ngozi is running, yeah, for this position, yeah. What do you think that this could be the impact that Mrs. Ngozi could be elected as a DG in the WTO? How it will increase the trade for Africa and for less developing countries? So I would like to hear Mrs. Sturgeon and Mrs. Rose.
Okay, do you want me to go or Ms. Rose first?
Mrs. Rose, you have your micro off.
I was saying, Toyin, it's okay. You can go first, Toyin. Okay,
good. So this is great because I was actually on another panel that was just discussing World Trade Organization, and what I describe is that the World Trade Organization is a power play, and having someone of African origin at the head of that table means that the interest of the entire continent is now being factored into the discussions. Because a lot of times when it comes to trade and investment all over the world, as I've personally engaged in those conversations, when I look around me, even when Africa is being discussed, you don't find Africans in the room. It's always through the lens of external interests. And that has driven a lot of the policies on the continent. And one of the reasons that at Nazaru, we committed to training policy leaders, over 1,000 policy leaders in the next 1 year, is because we've realized that a lot of the policies that are being implemented, over the last 10, 20, 30 years, have been policies that are externally facing, that favors external players. So for me, having the top seat at the World Trade Organization guarantees that Africa's interest will be put on the table, that there's going to be an oversight in that space. Now, the World Trade Center is not for Africa. It's called the World Trade Organization, I mean. So it's an entity for the world. And that's one of the things I try to explain to Africans. Don't get your hopes too high that having Ngozi at the table all of a sudden means everything is all good. No, it's a step in the right direction, and it guarantees that Africa's interest would now be part of the discussion on that table, because everybody representing their region at WTO, they're all about their region's interest. So when Africa doesn't have a representation at the table, Africa's interest has not been the top topic. But now going forward, if we can secure this seat, Africa's future is sealed, is guaranteed, and Africa's interest would be, one of the top places in the world. So I tell my African brothers and sisters, the work is still ahead of us, but this is almost, it's just such it's going to be such a remarkable opportunity for us to have this seat and to just, in a way, checkmate, because there are external forces, and that's another topic entirely in terms of external dynamics and external pressures that impacts the growth and economics on the continent today. Part of one of the examples I give is if you see a company like Cadbury, it's a 195-year-old company that has built a solid global business around cocoa that Africa produces over 40% of. If Africa wakes up one day and says, I want to use my cocoa, I'm not selling it anymore, I want to industrialize, that's going to disrupt the rest of the world. So in order to mitigate that disruption, AfCFTA will disrupt the world. It's going to disrupt the world. We just have to say it as the world, because the world as it is, if Africa changes, is going to impact the world, because the world has been powered by Africa's resources for centuries. So AfCFTA will disrupt the world, but having a seat at the World Trade Organization, a lead seat, would ensure that that is properly managed at the world stage. So that's just a very strategic view that I would give, but there are a lot of tactical implications as well. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Ronald.
Sebastian, I think Toyin has really put it well. For me, my excitement about it is not only that is an African, and I think there has been a lot of women have been at the back, have taken the back seat, or have not been given the equal opportunities, for a very long time. So for me, I think it's going to be very beneficial for her to be, for us as Africans, and not only Africans, but also least developing countries and developing countries, for her to be on that seat. Because as Toyin has rightly put it, when you come from, that background, you have a better understanding of the issues of those particular countries, and you can be able to articulate them even much better than somebody who's not from that background. And I can give an example of Dr. Mukisa Kitui, who is the Secretary General of UNCTAD, and he's a Kenyan. And since he was appointed the Secretary General of UNCTAD, Africa has really grown in terms of aid for trade, in terms of trade facilitation measures. Basically, the trading environment has grown as a result of a lot of, technical assistance, financial assistance to just boost, the structures that enable trade in Africa. And I think we are expecting the same of Ngozi if she's successful, that not only will she be able to assist us to better utilize the World Trade Organization, the agreements that are there in place, she will also be able to demystify, maybe just one fact that you may not be knowing is that African countries don't use the dispute resolution mechanism. So you don't find many African countries, actually I don't think any of them have gone, most of them have abused the dispute resolution mechanism just as maybe as interested party, but so that means a lot of injustices could be done against African countries or least developing countries. But just because traditionally we do not litigate, or we find that the processes of taking a suit against, a country that is more developed than you. Maybe the process is very complex. Maybe it takes a lot of time, but with her being on the table, she can be able to demystify this. She can be able to, make least developing countries and developing countries better understand how to get the maximum benefit out of the WTO. So that's what we are looking for, and we really hope that she can get it.
Okay, thanks. Well, I have one of the last questions for this first part. It's about last week in The Guardian, a newspaper in the US, talked about that one of the main issues of the free trade agreement in Africa is non-trade barriers. Yeah, that is one of the biggest challenges that the trade agreement have. Yeah, to implement it and to put in work all the countries. Yeah, I would like to know what is your insights about this kind of regards and insightfuls.
Yes, I think I alluded to a bit of it in my earlier presentation. One of the biggest challenges that prevent Intra-Africa trade and just even trade with Africa and other continents is non-tariff barriers. And what I can say is that there is already a lot that is going to be done on this. Individual countries, even before the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, have already started to put in place mechanisms to reduce these non-tariff barriers. We have 34 African countries who are signatories to the World Trade Organization Facilitation Agreement, which contains around 12 articles, which are all geared towards reducing non-tariff barriers. Additionally, we have platforms that have been put in place, electronic platforms that have been put in place by the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the regional economic blocks, to just report, for traders to report these non-tariff barriers, for them to be resolved as soon as possible. Additionally, we have one-stop border posts between countries, whereby this concept has helped to reduce the time, when trucks cross over and passengers cross over at the border, then we are having, less transit time, reducing demurrage and ensuring that goods get to the destination in the shortest time possible. In addition to that, we have mutual recognition agreements that have been entered between different African countries, just to ensure that issues of standards, issues of quality are not, are less in terms of being non-tariff barriers. So this is going to be addressed in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. There is an article in the agreement of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area that is going to specifically deal with this. And with the removal of the 90% of all tariffs, then the headache that will remain or is remaining behind is non-tariff barrier. The Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area has committed to dealing with this. So I think this is going to, we're going to see something positive from this.
Okay, Mrs. Tayum, do you have any?
Yes, I think for me, what we have seen, whether it's AGOA or the AfCFTA, is there's the government engagement and then there's the private sector engagement, meaning government can establish policies on paper, but if the private sector is not sensitized and educated, then those policies cannot be maximized. So what we've seen when it came to AGOA, Kenya did benefit, but there were regions, West Africa did not benefit as it could have from AGOA because of non-tariff barriers. And I love when you talked about demystifying all of these things, because those are some things we do. We now do export development training because we're finding that typically the private sector should be a step ahead of the policy leaders, meaning they should be the ones directing the path that policy needs to take, right? So if you're trying to implement a policy that needs to drive economics and commerce, the public sector, government should not be the one saying what's inside that. The private sector should be one step above and being in the room and saying, hey, this is what we need. This is what we need. Can you please do that? And that's what we call lobbying in the US, right? right? The private sector lobbied the US to make sure that policies that are being passed does not derail economic development in the private sector. Unfortunately, what we've seen with Africa is that the government is actually steps ahead of the private sector. And now the private sector is playing catch up to even say, what does the AFCFTA mean? What are the tariff opportunities? What are the non-tariff? Like now the private sector is trying to go all over the documents and trying to understand what they've just signed. That's what we are seeing. And that's the gap, is that the private sector is the missing piece, and the private sector on the continent has to be empowered, has to be sensitized, because it's the private sector in Africa that would lead the future of Africa when it comes to economic development. The last 20, 30 years, you've seen governments visit government. Like I tell people, they always come to Washington, D.C., but I tell you, the government visit Washington, D.C., but they don't bring their business executives. They don't bring their CEOs. When China visits Africa, they fly in with their millionaires, billionaires. That has to change. The work that Nazaru has been doing in the US is to also demystify all of this. And I tell people, the Washington political conversations would only birth you aid. If you're looking for trade, come to Detroit, come to Chicago, come to California. And an example of an interaction I had actually had to do with Kenya, and I forget the government official's name. He's in charge of media and everything that is showed on the media in the TV. And he told me that they were trying to develop the movie industry in Kenya, and they were trying to connect with Hollywood and Tyler Perry. And I basically told him, have you considered Chicago? Chicago produced Oprah. Chicago produced Obama. It's the third largest city. If you want to develop movie industry in a cost-effective way, come to Chicago. And he was like, how come we've never heard that before? It's like, let me connect you. And then I went to the city of Chicago and I said, Africa wants to do business when it comes to movie. And the city told me they have studios and everything Africa needs at a fraction of the cost if you were going to Hollywood. So to your question around AFCFTA, there's a conversation around governmental policies, whether it's the NAFTA, NAFTA with North America that has been updated now. The government will present you opportunities, but it's the private sector engagement that would ensure that these policies bear economic fruit. And that's the advice I give government. Bring your private sector ahead, bring them on, and also the legal structure. The lawyers on the continent have to be educated so that they know how to read all of these global contracts and they are not signing the future of Africa away. So that's just my viewpoint based on what I've seen, is that AFCFTA is fantastic, but it's only going to bear fruit if the private sector bring it to reality.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Tollian. So I would like to give the floors to Mrs. Series to have some words.
Thank you, Mr. Sebastian. The San Mateo University Foundation of the Vasco of Quiroga University, thank you all for your participation and sharing of the beautiful continent. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Yeah, believe me, it was an insightful view of Continental, of the opportunity that we have from Latin America and those challenges that Africa have with us. We took different point of view from services, from Mrs. Irene from Uganda, Mrs. Tollian from the US, Mrs. Rose Runner from Kenya. It was very insightful for our community. And hopefully, I know that it's the first event that is going to build new bridges between the two regions. We need to start to talk more about business in Africa. Africa could learn from Latin America. We can learn from Africa. We have a lot of things in common, more than we can believe. Yeah, it was interesting when Mrs. Rano was talking about Kenya exports coffee, exports tea, exports different kind of flowers, and the situation is similar to Colombia. Yeah, We export from Colombia tea, coffee, very good coffee, and we have flowers. Yeah, so we have markets in common, and so this is something that we can learn with this kind of events. So yeah, and we would like to say thanks to all. It was a wonderful morning, knowing more about this kind of trade opportunities and investment opportunities in Africa. So thanks for all our participants in Colombia and Mexico, in Africa, and in the US that were following us. And well, thanks very much, Mrs. Stoyan. Thanks, Mrs. Ronald, and thanks, Mrs. Urena from Uganda. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
See you. Bye.
See you in the next opportunity.